Hello guys, it's Eric with the Film Photography Channel. Let's take a look at the Barnack Leica. Oskar Barnack developed the first prototype for this camera, which actually had a fixed lens. This is a removable screw mount lens. He invented the first 35mm camera, and the way the story goes, Oskar Barnack suffered from a lung condition, as they named it, which was, I'm guessing, was probably asthma, and he did not have the physical ability to carry these big, heavy cameras for long periods of time. You know, back in those days, the cameras were all made from wood. They were these huge plate cameras, and the tripods were, again, solid wood and really big. So it took a lot to carry one of these around all day. So he envisioned coming up with a smaller camera like this that uses 35mm film. But what he did, instead of the way that 35mm film was used in motion picture cameras, where it would run vertically, he flipped the film horizontally for his design. And instead of the 18 by 24 film frame that they use for movies, he envisioned a 24 by 36, which is the horizontal aspect ratio, and which became 35mm film as we know it, and then of course subsequently what they call full frame for digital cameras. So as the history goes, the first prototype was introduced in 1914. 1925 was the first public introduction of the Leica Model A. Later on, the Leica II was the first one of these to have a coupled rangefinder, and later the Leica III improved the shutter. It adopted slow shutter speeds, and I'm going to show you all that. And actually had camera strap lugs, which the original models didn't. And finally, in 1935, they added a 1/1000th of a second fastest shutter speed. Previously, these cameras had 1/500th of a second as a top speed, and some didn't have the slower shutter speeds at all. It's a mixed bag. There's lots of little incremental adjustments and improvements, rather, that happen to these cameras. The most significant of which are in my view anyway, are the top shutter speed of the 1/1000th of a second, and the what they did with the rangefinder. The final iteration of the Barnack Leica was the Leica IIIg, which was released in 1957, which is actually after Leica released the M3, which was the successor to the Barnack Leica line. Leica went ahead and made one last Barnack Leica. The 3G had a larger viewfinder, and the body was a little taller overall. Also, the viewfinder had frame lines which were illuminated by a small window on the front of the camera, but was still the 50mm only aspect ratio. And it's pretty pricey. I mean, the floor for this camera is probably about $600 or $700, and I've seen them go for as much as $2,000. You know, just the normal models, not any special edition or anything like that. As we know, the sky can be the limit for Leica special editions. As you can see, this is an absolutely beautiful camera with the top engraving and everything going on there. Just impeccable craftsmanship. It's very similar to the Leica M in the respect that it's got that bottom plate that opens up. If you see the engraving there, Auf and Zu. Auf in German means open, Zu means closed. The bottom plate of this camera, it's very similar to an M camera. You know, if you look at it, it's pretty, should be pretty familiar. You just open the bottom up there, and you see this diagram with the long, narrow film strip. And that's one little quirk about this camera, is you have to cut the film to basically the length of the back. And when I say you have to cut the film, I mean you have to, like, cut the film. You have to make the film narrower than it normally is. You kind of measure it out here like that, and what you're looking for is just basically for the spool to be the length of the camera, this narrow tab. So it seems like back in the days before there were commercially
um, commercially packed film cartridges. What used to happen is that folks would, load up their own film, and the commercially available packages had this taller film leader, which would get caught up in the shutter mechanism with the cloth curtain shutter. So that's basically what you're looking for right there. Try to avoid any sharp edges, anything that'll get caught up in the film. I'll have to just trim that away, but that just gives you an idea what it's supposed to look like. And then when you go to load it, you, just like the M3, you remove this spool here. All right, you remove this spool, and which is there. Now the M3 has some perforated arrows that make it a little easier to check when your film has been properly inserted. All right, so I just broke my film. So anyway, this is what you end up with. Okay, it looks like that. Then you insert it thusly. Just making sure that it slides in there. There you go.
So you'll notice that there is no opening, like you see, this big old door that swings open for the M3 and all the other M cameras. This Barnack Leica doesn't have that. It's a completely sealed back, so it's a little more tricky to load the film. I didn't expect to like this camera as much as I do. The first thing that hit me when I actually picked one up, because I've seen these things on the internet a lot, and I've kind of had a casual interest in these over the years because I'm a Leica fan, but I never actually had one of these in my hand to where I can really see what it's like, how they're made. And the first thing that I'll tell you, that they feel solid, just like most Leica cameras do. It's a nice solid build. It's a nice, very purposeful, very mechanical build with all these wonderful dials and buttons and levers and switches all over the place. These collapsible lenses are a staple of these cameras. Most of them have. You're going to find they either come with a collapsible lens, or there's certainly plenty of them out there to choose from. You can see how it flattens the profile of the camera and makes it very easy to fit in your pocket. I'll mention that this is a screw mount. Okay, it does not take the Leica M mount or any other bayonet type of mount. This is a screw mount only camera. It's known as the M39, which is the Leica screw mount designation. There are other cameras that also have screw mounts. You might see like an L39 or other, and I think the pitch between the threads are going to be just a little bit different. So if you get one of these, just make sure that you get the actual M39 Leica screw mount, so it'll fit on there without any doubt. These cameras are largely about the same. They're a 35 millimeter camera that has shutter speeds from 1 second to 1/1000th of a second. Most of them. If you see this little dial on the front, it has the slower shutter speeds. Now, I'll mention one thing about that. This is a camera that you use probably for ambient light conditions, outdoors, in other words. You can use a flash with it, but I don't use a flash with any Leica. I don't think ever. I just don't. It's just like a street photography camera. So if the point being, if you see one of these without the dial, doesn't mean it's a non-starter. You just lose the shutter speeds from well, you actually, on this camera, you have 1/30th. If this dial were not on here, then you would lose the speeds that are slower than 1/30th. Which again is not the end of the world. I would pay more attention to it having the top 1/1000th of a second shutter speed than the slower shutter speeds. Not a huge deal to me. The first thing that really stuck out to me with this camera is the size of it. I mean, it's tiny, and if we can compare here to an M3. okay, which, as you can see, is significantly bigger. This camera weighs about a little more than half what the M3 weighs. I can feel the weight of this M3 right away, and this is like, you know, causing no stress at all. It's just a very light camera. And the M3, I never really considered it to be heavy, but it's definitely heavier than this camera. And you can see they're both obviously beautifully made cameras. They're gorgeous in their own right. But if the one thing that spending time with this Barnack Leica for a while, the biggest thing I noticed when I pick up this M3, and you can see it probably, let's get a better grip here, you can probably see it yourself right away. The M3 looks like some modern futuristic design, right? When compared to this, if you look at all the dials, and you know the M3's got the film advance lever and all this good stuff. I mean, they just look like they're cameras from two different eras, and they kind of are. But I found it interesting because I've been using this camera a lot. I've been taking it everywhere. So the M3's been sitting on the shelf a lot lately. And now that I look at them, I mean, this looks like some modern whiz-bang, you know, brand new design, futuristic design compared to this. And this camera was from the 1950s, basically. All right, so as we look at this gorgeous camera here with all the neat, you know, the neat quality design and everything, I'll just go over a few things. The top plate, for example, you can see has the lovely engravings like the cameras of its day tend to have. This dial here, this is your film advance lever, or film advance dial, I should say, and it's very simple. All you do, you take the photo, there's shutter release right there, and then you advance the film. And you'll notice right away that the shutter speed dial is moving. What's happening there is when you advance the film with this knob here, you're simultaneously cocking the shutter, which, you know, the shutter speed dial turns when you cock the shutter. And as such, when you take the photo, it also turns. If you ever want to make a double exposure using this camera, you simply cock the shutter using this dial here, and you got to do it all in one motion. So I just cocked the shutter, but I didn't advance the film because I didn't turn this dial at all. So that's one way you can make a double exposure with this camera. You can cock the shutter using the shutter speed dial. If you turn in this direction, it's a reminder by the back window turning black that you're using black and white film. If you turn it the other direction, you get the red window that lets you know that you are using color film. Now, I don't know if you notice these numbers on here, but they don't go very far. Film back in the day of this camera was, you know, ISO 12, ISO 25, ISO 50 was your standard film, and in that day, that's about as far as it would go. So this camera doesn't have ISO even 100 or 400 or 800, any of that. Of course, there's no meter. Again, this is just a reminder window to let you know what's in there. This rotating plate at the base of the film advance knob is your film counter. It's not behind a window like you'd expect to see in most 35mm cameras. It's a nice flat plate that's really easy to view. So you simply set it to 2 positions before 0. That way, once you load your film and advance it 2 frames, your film counter will be right at 0 and you're ready to start shooting. All right, moving on, we have the film rewind release lever. Very simple. You just flip that and you see how it disengages like the shutter and everything. You heard that click in there, of course. And now you're ready to pull up on this film rewind knob just like on the M3 and then start rewinding your film. And you know, just push it down when you're all done. So what happens there is, like I said, this lever just disengages the shutter and everything. So when you're ready to load the camera back up, you just put the lever back in place, but you have to start using the film advance here, and everything will engage. It'll fall into place because this will feel loose once you have this film rewind, engaged or opened. This will feel loose, like there's no connection to any of the gears inside, but you will start to feel it once you just start turning the knob, and you'll hear everything fall into place. All right, moving on. We have on this particular camera, which is the Leica IIIc, which was converted to a 3F. This camera has the flash sync. That's this bottom dial that's under the shutter speed. Where is it? That's under the shutter speed dial. There's these little notches here that'll cut your finger if you're not careful. And so this camera was upgraded from a 3C to 3F. The 3F picked up these flash sync. Leica was really thorough with all the settings you see there for the flash sync, because there was so many different type of flash bulbs back in those days. There wasn't really much of a standard. So they kind of left it open to just about every type of bulb that you can find back then. A modern day photographer, you can use the PC sync port in the back here. You can use that, run it to your flash, and put it on the cold shoe. You probably will have to put some tape or something on the bottom of the flash to cover up the contacts, because this is bare metal. And bare metal on a flash doesn't always go well. Your flash might start going off by itself. I've experienced that in the past. So definitely, if you plan on using flash with this camera, which I don't know why, but because the flash sync speed is like 1/25 of a second, so I don't know how practical that would be. But in any case, if you do plan to do that, just make sure you cover up the bottom of the flash with some tape or something, so the accessory shoe doesn't set it off. And this little tab right here, what this does is it fixes the diopter in your focusing window. Okay, as you're looking through this window here, you have the ghosted split image, or the ghosted image, not a split image. And if when it's in focus it doesn't look clear to you, then you can actually change the diopter, which I thought it was just an amazing feature to have on such an old camera, that they thought of that, you know, how to fix the diopter so you don't have to wear your glasses when you're looking through there. And I actually seen this feature in one version or the other, in pretty much all of the interchangeable lens Barnack Leicas that I've ever looked. So what we have here in the back, we have these two windows. Now some of the older models had these two windows separated. You know, one is here and the other one would be way over here. And what these two windows are, this is your rangefinder window that you use to focus. Now Leica referred to these as the autofocus window back in those days, because this was considered autofocusing, you know, even though it's not, you know, what we think of as autofocus today. That's what they called it. And then this other window here is where you frame your shot. Now if you see how they line up there, the rangefinder window is like right here, and the viewfinder window is like right there. And the viewfinder window, you look straight through this window here. This window is 50 millimeters only. There's no frame lines, and there's no settings for, no way to use another lens other than a 50 millimeter through this window, you know, using the window. But there are accessory viewfinders, and I'll show you. Let me show you what one of those looks like. If you look at this thing here, it looks like it should be part of a pistol or something, a revolver, but what it is actually a revolving viewfinder that, as you look at it, you see how long this lens is. This is the 135 millimeter lens, and then the shorter lenses are shorter focal lengths. This accessory finder will cover 135 mil, which they call 13.5 centimeters, 8.5 centimeters, 85 mil, 35, 28, and also 50 mil. And it's a little bit bigger viewfinder. It's nice and clear, not good glass and everything. It's I believe a Russian made. I don't even know what the name is of it, but I bought it you know, on eBay, and it works pretty good. I mean, it's a little bit cumbersome, but what you do with this thing is you put it, let's see here, we put it on top of here on the viewfinder, then you can just look through there, you know, in the back there, you just look through the little rangefinder viewfinder window. There's no focusing that happens here. All this does is emulate the focal lengths, and you still just focus through your back leftmost window there. Now, speaking of that window, the focusing window, it also has a magnification. I don't know exactly how much it's magnified. I couldn't find that information anywhere, but it's a pretty good magnification, and the entire window does your ghosting, just like the rangefinder patch does in the middle of like what is it called, the Mesuker, which is what M stands for, like in M3. Those cameras give you a little patch in the middle of the frame. This little window is focuses using the entire frame, and again with the magnified field of view, it's pretty neat actually that you can like focus in, or you can focus like close on someone's face or what have you. It's a pretty good way to go. The focusing is actually pretty superb on these cameras. It's super accurate, based on that and on the fact that if you notice how far apart these two windows are, the rangefinder window and then the other window that makes the rangefinder stuff happen. One thing to look out for with these cameras is to either ask the seller or check to see that this mirror is good in here, because the ghosting of the image and everything happens through the use of this mirror, and if the mirror is faded, you can barely see any focus action happening. This camera happens to have a nice clean mirror, and it's very easy to focus, and it's really apparent when you turn your focus dial. It's really apparent that the focusing, the ghosting of the image is happening. So look out for that. And to continue on here, this is your slow shutter speeds. All right, and as you can see here, the way this works, and I'll get this guy out of the way. This cold shoe, by the way, you can see the two little skis on there, I call them. They really go a long way towards holding accessories like this in a really tight and secure manner, which is important if you're carrying around accessories that are coupled or slid into your shoe. There, you want to make sure they're not going to slip off by accident. So it's a very firm, the way that it holds these accessories here, which is a really good thing. Okay, the way the slow shutter speeds work on this camera is you have to ensure that you have to make sure the shutter's cocked so you can get the correct reading on the shutter speed dial. Then you turn the shutter speed to 1/30th, as you see there, and that engages the slow shutter speed dial down here. The slow shutter speed dial locks in using this little tab right here. It locks it in at 1/30th. So if you rotate this thing to a point, it'll actually lock in at 1/30th of a second, which is the same speed that you set up there. But if you want to use a slower shutter speed than that, you just kind of push in this thing really easily. It allows you to use other slow shutter speeds, and this ranges all the way down to 1 second. I think that's 1/10 we got set up there, but as you can see, it ranges all the way down to 1 second. And this camera actually has the T setting, and T, if you don't know, stands for timed. And the time setting is you simply press the shutter while it's in the T setting. Top dial is on 30th to employ the bottom dial. Bottom dial is on T. Press the shutter, and then you can hear the shutter open, but it never actually closed. So the way you close the shutter is you rotate away from the T, and it'll close the shutter right up. And what that does is it allows you to take long exposure photos of any amount of time that you need without any problem, because the shutter just stays open until you rotate away from the T setting. This camera also has bulb on the top dial. The top dial goes from 1/30th down to bulb, right? The next position. And as we know, a bulb, everybody knows what bulb does. And by the way, you got to pull up on the shutter dial to change the settings. Bulb stays open as long as your finger is pressing, and then you hear the clockwork kick in. As all mechanical cameras of this era, they use like a clockwork mechanism to set their shutter speeds. So let's look at some of these lenses here. Like I said, these are screw mount lenses, which are just what they sound like. They screw on and off. All right, let's see here. Just a couple of turns, like 3 or 4 turns, and it'll come right off. And this is always fun doing this on camera. I want to make sure I don't drop my lens. All right, so, and I showed you this is a collapsible lens. This is a Russian knockoff of the Leica Elmar. It's a blatant copy of the Leica lens, and you can see there it's collapsible and all that, and it's got decent build quality. It's not as nice as the actual Leica as you might have guessed, and the optics are great. like I said, they pretty much copied the optical formula. I think, you know, with the war going on in the 40s and all that, there's probably not a lot of people paying attention to patents and all that. This lens, I like in terms of the form factor. I'm gonna actually get a proper Leica, Leica lens, but I just got this one because these only cost like $35, and I wasn't sure how much I would be into this camera. I had no idea I was gonna like it as much as I do. But in any case, this little guy, it's a knockoff of the Elmar. It's a 5 centimeter or 50 millimeter f3.5, and it does a fine job. Everything works just fine. It's the aperture ring is right there. Okay, and you can see it goes from f3.5 to f16. Right, so this gorgeous piece of lens here is the Leica 5 centimeter f2 Scimitar. Now, Scimitar came in before the Summicron and after the Samar, I think it was called. And so it's a Highline f2 50 millimeter lens, you know, again in the screw mount. And you can see it's significantly bigger than the Elmar, which would be the same size. You can see the Elmar is a tiny lens compared to the f2 Scimitar. And there's a story behind how I ended up with two 50 millimeter lenses. If you buy one of these things on eBay, and I haven't seen them for sale anywhere else, this is called the Industar 50. It's a, you know, again, it's a good lens, $30-40 at the most. And, you know, and it gets the job done without any problem. The problem buying these things is that they are only available from either Ukraine or from Russia, and it took every bit of 2 months between, from what the seller told me, everything goes out by boat because of Corona. Once it gets here, it's going to sit in customs for a month. So it took every bit of 2 months to get this thing. So, you know, given that I don't wait very well, I ended up looking around for another screw mount lens, and I ran across this at my local photo shop, and it was in really bad shape. I mean, the aperture ring was stuck. You know, the grease had dried up in there and kind of turned into cement almost. And the same thing with the focusing tab. The focusing was really rough. So anyway, long story short, I ended up buying it for $100. I think the guy really thought he was selling me trash. I paid him $100 for it. I sent it to Mr. Yi at yyecamera.com. Mr. Yi, what he did is he, you know, took the lens apart, CLA'd it, re-greased it, and now this thing is silky smooth. And bonus that this has, as you can see here, the 10 aperture blades. Look at that nice little circle that happens at all apertures. You'll notice also that it's not a clicky aperture. All right, there's no clicks, and that's by design, and I'm not crazy about that, but it's silky smooth now. Same thing with the focusing. You know, focusing is silky smooth, and I'm telling you, you could not move it without straining and, you know, potentially damaging the lens. So I didn't mess with it anymore. I just sent it to him. Just to recap here, this lens ended up costing me, between the CLA and the purchase of the lens, $230, including shipping to Mr. Yi for the CLA. It's a $400 lens, so yay for me. Any case, these lenses, to include the little one, anyone with these tabs here, these focus tabs, they usually will have an infinity lock, which is really useful. I'm not sure why they did away with that, but you literally can lock it into infinity, as you might guess. You see the little tabs there. When you push a little extra, it locks it into infinity. You can walk around with this thing, shoot all day without having to even think about focusing, which is a nice little deal. And it's just, you know, it's just convenient. But again, the focusing works great. And you can see the long travel there on this lens. So this is actually a pretty superb lens. It's sharp. It's I can't really tell the difference between this or a Summicron, but it's a pretty sharp lens, and it's you know, it's really well made. It's silky smooth. It's the only downside to this lens is you can see how big it is. It does cut into the viewfinder a little bit. As you look through the viewfinder to compose your shot, you see, you know, the barrel of this lens a little bit, which doesn't happen with these tiny little lenses here. That's like the Elmar, and that kind of makes the Elmar like the classic lens to use with these cameras. And I was never looking for this lens this big. I just, like I said, I stumbled across it, And for the price, I just, I had to go ahead and do it because I had no plan on spending $400 for, for one of these lenses, because that's what they go for. They go for about $400. And I didn't know how much I was going to be using this camera, so I'm like, I don't know if I want to spend that much. This camera holds the distinction of being the most copied camera ever made. Okay, this camera was either counterfeited or just imitated more than any other camera that's ever been made. So what happened, you had two basic copies. You had a flat out counterfeit, which would actually say Leica on the top here, but they're pretty easy to spot. I mean, they have a funky looking rangefinder window. There might even like be a screw on the front or something like that. So they're not very good counterfeits, but they actually do say Leica. And then there's the copies, which Contax, Nikon, Canon, many other manufacturers actually copy these cameras and put their own brand on there. And they wouldn't look exactly the same, but they would look very similar. The big film advance knob, the film rewind lever was always in place. Shutter speed, everything would be pretty much in the same place. You'd have the 3 viewfinder windows. And Leica themselves, they didn't change this model very much at all for about 20 years. Nobody imagined straying away from this design for a very long time. So when Leica designed this, I mean, it stuck. It really stuck. And this was what a 35 millimeter film camera was back in those days, and very little argument or pushback from anybody. At least certainly for Leica, they didn't change their own design for a full 20 years, and until the M series came around. But this was extremely popular and really well received camera, and especially for one that was as expensive as it was, even back in those days. Okay, I'll mention also the lenses here. This is a modern Voigtlander lens that is a screw mount, and you can see how tiny it is, and it's perfect for this little body. I'll see if I can pop it on here real quick. The curtain shutter, as you can see right there. And also look out for the condition of these shutters. Some were better than others. Some of the models were better than others. I think if you get to a 3C or better, they have the better shutters in them. So moving on here, this tiny little Voigtlander lens, a 15mm f4.5 lens, sharp as a tack. This is an example of a modern lens, which was built, I think, in the 2000s, early 2000s, maybe late 90s, but much more modern lens than any of these that I've been showing you, which are all from the 40s or 50s. And so you can get, obviously, a modern picture. These older lenses, are sometimes single-coated. They might be prone to flare a little bit, if the sun is hitting at an angle, and you might get, some kind of like weird ghosting or flaring or what have you. But don't be thrown off by that. It's just it's a classic lens look. There's nothing wrong with that. Just go with that. And some of them also have like these muted, like pastel looking colors. As bad as it may sound to the Leica purist, some of the best lenses you can get for your Barnack Leica in the screw mount are going to come from Canon and from Nikon, also from Voigtlander. They make great screw mount lenses as well. Now these Nikon, Canon, Voigtlander lenses were also from the same era as these collapsible Leica lenses, as thus they had their own unique characteristics, such as color, contrast, that classic film look. On some of them, the bokeh would have like a pretty well-defined ring around the bokeh bubbles. And it's pretty nice that you can get a f1.4, 1.8, even a 1.2 from Canon or Nikon for a whole lot less than you would have to pay for the equivalent Leica lens, if they even make such a lens. Voigtlander, in fact, makes one of the sharpest 50mm lenses. It's an f3.5 Heliar, and it's a kind of odd looking lens. It's shaped like a cone, but it is literally one of the sharpest lenses on the planet. The Barnack Leica was a true system camera.
It was surprising how many different types of accessories and how many different types of photography these cameras were capable of. There was a 400mm telephoto lens that I saw that actually incorporated a viewfinder that would periscope down right here in front of the camera, like down in here, and then you'd have this huge lens coming out of the front of the camera. Also, there was a stereo adapter and many other, like a 250 frame film back I think it was actually not a film back, but I think it was actually the entire camera that was just geared up for 250 frames. So there was a lot of innovation that came with this camera, and it was a true system camera, not just because of the fact there were interchangeable lenses.
I ran across this photographer. He's UK based. His name is Matt Osborne. He's a treasure trove of information when it comes to the Leica camera, both film and digital. Matt was a great help in guiding me towards the right camera and answering my questions that I had about lenses. He's got a blog, mrleica.com, that's very popular. And of course, he's also on YouTube. Just search for mrleica.com and you'll run across his channel. So this is just a quick shout out to Matt to say thanks so much for your help and to let everybody else know about your YouTube channel and your blog. Thank you, Matt.